NSFW, what is the sexiest thing anyone has ever said to you? How did you react? She just said okay. Valentine's Day a few years back I surprised my GF at the time by blindfolding her, driving her around for a bit, then giving her a piggyback ride into an empty apartment that I was moving out of. I had set up a fort with chairs and silk sheets. Inside I had made dinner for us. So we ate dinner and then afterwards I set up a Jenga tower in the fort. We both were into little games like that, and I told her that if she beat me at Jenga, I would go down on her, and if I beat her at Jenga, she'd go down on me. She looked at me and just said okay. And then she slapped the fuck out of the Jenga tower. Well then. Stopped by a liquor store to grab a six-pack, get to the counter and there's an attractive cashier. I put the beer on the counter and she asks if there's anything else I need, and I respond no, that should do me. She looks me straight in the eyes and says yeah, but who's gonna do me? I was speechless and completely flustered, mumbled some sort of response, I don't even remember what. Went home and told my fiancée so she would know she's not the only one in this relationship who gets hit on by strangers. To this day probably the most overtly sexual comment that someone other than a significant other has ever said to me. Me, it's fucking cold in here. Sitting in her icebox of an apartment. Her, it's warm here. Spreads legs and nods towards vagina. Warmed up real fucking fast. I was just hooking up with a new guy and he was cuddled up behind me. Ran his finger down my ribs towards my hip and ass and said people fight wars for curves like this. I had recently gotten out of a relationship where the guy would constantly tell me I was too fat and that he was only attracted to girls with bones sticking out. I cried and then we had amazing sex against my boyfriend was out of town for 2 weeks. He was finally driving home to our apartment and texted me 5 minutes away from fucking you. He was punctual. My ex told me he loves the sound of my heartbeat, all sweet and innocent like, but then just dropped, but I much prefer to hear it from between your thighs on me. Completely unprompted and out of left field pulled my legs together, in a good way, and went bright red from the shame of how much that turned me on. I will never forget this. My ex, before we ever dated, we were just best friends. We had done stuff of a sexual nature beforehand, but never had sex. One night, we finally had sex, but as we're making out and getting into it she looks at me and says with the most sincere voice I ever heard, I've waited so long for this, I just felt so desired. Wanted. It wasn't overtly sexy, but it was like this great sense of conviction and relief. And I was the prize. I have 20 minutes before class and the keys to one of the rooms. You coming? I absolutely came. Come in me before I get arrested. My reaction, I came in her. Context, innocent girlfriend without so much as a bad school record, car sex at midnight in a park. Someone pulled up behind us and left. Scared the shit out of us. Quote above came, soon after. I made some self-derogatory comment on the first date. He laughed, leaned in and said, I do bad things to you. Smiled, and leaned back. Married 5 years. Me and my ex crashed in a friend's backyard on a fold-out couch under a gazebo. Woke up around noon, a little hungover. Cuddled for a bit. Started getting touchy-feely. Her back was to me. After a few minutes of enjoying the hell out of her boobs and her butt, she looked back at me and whispered, I want you inside me. Simple, straight to the point, but the look on her face as she said it would have made my knees weak if we were standing. Oddly enough, that's the only time I've ever had sex outside. Glad the weather was nice. And that my friend didn't wake up and interrupt us because I was so goddamn turned on I don't think I would have stopped. I was seeing this girl once and she wore this black nighty outfit one night. She climbed on top and we were kissing and then she whispered in my ear, can I taste it? I swear to good I nearly blew my load from that alone. The first time it was safe to come inside my GF she whispered during sex, please come back inside, I want to know how it feels right in my ear. So hot. When someone says I want you in that voice that sounds as though they will die if they don't have you. Instantly gets me going. I have a pretty low libido after my last girlfriend 6 years ago. I had a thing with this girl a year ago, she had a crazy high libido, and we both liked each other quite a bit. We were on the phone, and she was telling me the types of sexual things she was into, and she asked, what are you into? I felt awkward, and replied, I don't really know anymore, I haven't really been active. I'm sorry, that isn't the answer you wanted. And she said, that's fine, you can come over and use my body for as long as you need. Find out what you like, don't worry about it being bad or good. My chest still gets hot and heavy when I think about her saying those words to me. Not sexy per se, but my favorite was I could pick strawberries to your voice all day. I have no idea what that means. I had some friends coming over to hang out. The doorbell rang, and my girlfriend at the time said, "You're not answering the door until you come for me," and then proceeded to get on her knees. I had sex in a changing room with my now ex-girlfriend one day and I came inside her to avoid having to clean up. We didn't plan it and had no tissues. We were still pretty horny as we left the store, so we decided to take a taxi back home right away. On the way back, she kept saying how she could still feel my cum inside her and how horny she was getting from it. She spent the whole ride looking at me while her face was getting more and more red and she was practically begging me to fuck her again as soon as we get home. I don't think anything will ever top that. I was hard the whole ride and we had sex as soon as we stepped inside my room. Good times. I showed up to a girl's house for a date and she answered the door wearing an open silk robe and nothing else. At a loss for words, I said I thought we were going out for dinner? To which she replied with a wicked smile, "I thought we'd have dessert first." One of the best evenings of my young life. A girl once patted my head and said my hair was soft. I said thanks. Put one in my ass. We were spooning. I was fingering her pussy with 2 fingers. She said that to me. My heart started beating out of my chest. I have a big fetish for girls asking for their asses to be played with. I ended up fucking her ass that same night in what ended as the most intense orgasm I ever had. She was giving me a warm-up handy during our first encounter. And she takes her finger from her other hand, wipes the tip of my dick, licks it, and says, "You're the sweetest. Give me more." Then blew me until I came. I think my toes went numb. Last year, my boyfriend said, "I love feeling your lips against mine," and when I told him that I loved kissing him too, he corrected me and said I didn't mean the lips on your face. I'll never forget it. There was this one time a guy I was totally into, I allowed to go down on me. Keep in mind, I'm quite self-conscious of this being a woman and hearing all the rhetoric that had come from most guys at the time about how they do not like to do this. He was quite insistent and as we got into it, he came up quite heady and I figured he was getting tired or something. But instead he says, "My God, you smell so good," and all but dove back in. Made my heart jump into my throat how good it felt to truly be desired like that. I already knew I liked this guy, but that reached into a place where I felt as though my vulnerabilities were allowed to be laid out on the table and reconciled with. I'm not sure if I was ready for that experience, because it definitely causes me to step it up with someone who wants me like that, but I haven't forgotten it. Hooked up with some girl at a music festival. Had sex the first time while gloriously drunk in a field. It was okay but nothing to write home about. A day later, we end up in her tent, fuck a bit. During the after-sex cuddles with a hand around her neck, my dick ends up between her butt cheeks, and she goes wild, starts whimpering, looks back at me and says use me any way you want, I'm yours. I'd been dating my now husband for a little over a year and we were on a little weekend getaway. Our room was super romantic with a big fireplace. It was the first night we got there and we had just had a great dinner at a pizza and wine bar. We get back to the band and things start to heat up. I go to freshen up a bit, come back out and he grabs me and says I can fuck you tomorrow, tonight, I'm going to make love to you. I melted. We proceeded to make love like neither of have in our lives right on the floor in front of the burning fireplace. It was truly like a movie. We connected on a level I didn't think was possible, like an out-of-body experience. I cried during and after because it was just so emotionally intense. I was emotionally wrecked for days after. We still talk about it often and is one of our most precious memories together. I had been seeing this girl for a few weeks. I was super into her and it seemed like she was quite into me. We had made out a few times but I was nervous about going too fast. One night we got to making out and she kinda just stopped, looked me in the eyes and said I want you to fuck my brains out. After the deed was done and we caught our breaths she asked me what took you so long to make a move? I told her I was just nervous. She smiled and said go get some water. You're gonna need it. I plan to fuck you into a coma tonight. And winked at me. Possibly the greatest night of my life. Could barely walk by the time we were done with each other. Most guys get obsessed after I give them head me. Well, what do you do? What I'm told, I exchanged these texts 2 beers in at my cousin's wedding up north, so it was all that was on my mind for when I took my trip back home. The sexiest thing ever said to me couldn't have come at the worst or most inappropriate time. There was this girl who I had past relations with, who was at the time dating my best friend. We all went out for a night on the town with another friend and his girlfriend. I was the DD so I had only had 1 beer the entire night with dinner. Everyone else was getting pretty drunk so all was well. Except that the girl was getting a little flirtatious with me. I noticed and kept my distance, because I didn't want any unnecessary drama. Granted I still liked this girl, but I behaved. Well, time comes for us to go home and we get into the SUV. She climbs into the front passenger seat, leaving her boyfriend to ride in the back. She drunkenly cranks the radio up so loud that I can barely focus on the road. I ask her to turn it down, she doesn't listen. I tell her to turn it down, she doesn't listen. The vehicle had volume control on the steering wheel, so I override the volume there. It takes her a few minutes to understand what's going on and reaches over to grab the steering wheel to make me stop turning it down, causing us to swerve on the main road. I lost it. I yelled at her to never, ever, touch the steering wheel again while I was driving. Now I'm a pretty laid-back guy, I rarely ever yell. But it was probably the most dominant and assertive thing I have ever said. The entire vehicle gets dead quiet, and I continue driving. I look over at her and she's staring at me. Not in an angry expression, but I'll never forget that face, or what she said next. "I want you to fuck me right now." Right in front of the other couple, right in front of her boyfriend. Granted, I really wanted to. But I declined, and when she asked why not, reminded her that she was still dating my best friend who was still in the car with us. Needless to say, shit hit the fan when we got home. But I'll never forget that. My husband told me, mid-coitus, that he was going to, and I quote, "fuck a baby into me." This is when we were trying to conceive. Damn near came on the spot. Really pushed my button. It's a staple of pillow talk now since I told him how much I liked it. I was pounding her in doggy, and right after she came, she squeezed the blankets with her hands and said, oh mine your cock just for me." Her English wasn't that good and she always tried not to use it, but that destroyed me. Ever since I was little, people have been telling me how beautiful my eyes are. As a guy, that's one of the very few compliments I get about my looks. But as I got older, the bright blue and green in my eyes has kind of faded a bit. And I grew into my lashes, so they aren't big for a boy anymore. I'd say around 18 to 20 I stopped getting compliments on my eyes. Well, I started seeing this new girl last year. We'd been on a couple dates and at this point we had already clicked. We had already previously had the sex talk and had decided we wanted to give it a few weeks. We really wanted to make sure this was gonna work before we hopped into bed. Well, unlike night 4 or 5, we were just sitting and talking on the couch in my room. And then mid-sentence she just stops talking and just stared. I asked her what was up and she said, "I'm sorry, I just got lost in your eyes for a second. Has anyone ever told you how beautiful they are?" My heart freaking melted and I could feel my blood redirecting. Then she just goes, in a pretty commanding but sensual voice, "Take your pants off now." I complied immediately. I felt like the roles had swapped. This chick just used a super romantic compliment and eye contact to get into my pants. And that's when I found out that I enjoy being submissive just as much as dominant. It was actually really nice to have somebody else take charge and tell me what to do. That theme continued through our first sexual encounter, and then we sort of flip-flopped roles frequently for the rest of our time together. She was a great girl and we were very compatible in bed. But we had some life view differences that we couldn't get around. So unfortunately it had to end. And I haven't found another girl since who likes to be the dominant, which is unfortunate. I really like a girl whose mind is as open as mine in bed. One time a girl said to me, "I'm going to eat you out in front of a mirror so you can see how beautiful you are when you come, kitten." And it still reappears in my dreams. I reacted by dragging her into the bathroom and immediately making that promise get fulfilled. Out of context, this would probably not be considered sexy, but it changed the way I looked at this girl for the rest of the time I knew her. During university, I was working on a group project with 5 people, that lasted the entire semester. I was the only guy. All of the girls were great to work with, and at the risk of sounding shallow, some were good looking, some were not. There was one girl who I felt was way out of my league. To paint a picture, she looked like Portia de Rossi, or the boss from Better Off Dead. She was an A-type personality, but was still crazy socially active. Halfway through the semester, we were all grouped for a long time as deadline after deadline came and went. One particularly long day we were all cramped into a small study room, and I was trying to vocalize an idea by talking it out. I must have rambled for 5 minutes before realizing I wasn't getting anywhere. I apologized to the girls for talking so much, and the girl that I thought was way out of my league said fairly nonchalantly while she was supporting her head with her hand, "No, don't stop speaking, I love listening to you talk." Everyone else looked at her. My jaw went slack as I tried to think of what to say to that. When she realized what she said, she went a deep red. After that, I felt like a bunch of things she said were directed at me. Probably just my imagination though. Matched up with this girl on Bumble. Had some good conversation, then she invited me to a brewery block party a few days later. I showed up later in the evening and she had already been there with her friend for a few hours drinking. Since she was a bit inebriated, she was very relaxed and super social. We hung out for a bit outside, then she tells me she wants me to follow her inside to meet up with her friend. As soon as we walk through the entrance, she stops, turns around and kisses me passionately. It took me by surprise, but it was amazing. She said, "I thought I'd just get that out of the way to relieve any nervousness," and that's exactly what that did. I was able to loosen up myself after that. Another hour or so goes by and she's still pretty drunk. She pulls me aside and says, "Listen. I'm too drunk to drive. You're driving me home. We're going to stop at Arby's and then I'm going to fuck your brains out," and that's exactly what happened. Like many have mentioned, it wasn't even so much about the sexual nature of what she said, but the way it made me feel wanted. Like someone actually lusted after me. I'm not sure women understand that men like to feel wanted too, and when we are, it goes a long way with us and is something we remember for a long time.